Hello, everybody. How are you doing? My name's Aaron Hannigan, and I'm with the Office of Public Engagement here at the White House. And I'd like to welcome you all, all of you in the audience, our champions, and all the viewers online. Welcome to this wonderful event. We're really excited to be here today to honor these wonderful champions and the work that they all do. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind everyone in the audience here today to please mute your phones if you have any. Cell phones or Blackberries, please put them on mute. I also wanted to make sure that all of you here today and watching online can learn more about our champions featured today and any of our past champions by going to www.whitehouse.gov/champions. You can learn more about past champions, and our champions of today will be featured next week, so you can learn more about them in detail on that website next week. There's also a great source of information on the topic we are discussing today at www.whitehouse.gov/one-is-too-many. So I urge you all to check it out. Finally, I'd like to get started so we can have a great conversation today with our champions. I'm very excited today that we have a special guest opening today's event. Our first speaker today is Valerie Jarrett. Valerie is Senior Advisor to the President and is the Chair of the White House Council on Women and Girls. So please join me in welcoming Valerie to the stage.
Wow. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the White House. We are delighted to have you here. I bring you greetings on behalf of President Obama, who I hope you all know is such a strong supporter of our efforts to combat domestic violence. The Champions for Change program is one of our favorites. It's just good news. And it's a way for us to recognize people who aren't always at the front of the headlines getting the accolades that they deserve, but people who are just working so hard to try to bring about positive change in our communities. It gives us an opportunity to highlight their hard work and their successes and their achievements from people of all walks of life all over the country. And so I'm particularly delighted to be here today with all of you. Congratulations. One more. Can we have a round of applause for our champions? Because of our champions and because of all of you who care about this issue and who are here with us today or watching as we stream this, the world is a better place due to your efforts, and there are so many women and children across our country who are safer today because of you. So on behalf of the President, I thank you. I also want to thank Lynn Rosenthal, who's heading up our office in the White House. First time ever. First time ever a president has had a position such as this in the White House. And I also want to thank Susan Carbon, who heads up the office in the Justice Department. Susan, congratulations to you as well. Last year, I had the honor of standing with the President and the Vice President over in the residence when we had a forum here on the White House focusing on domestic violence. And it was an unprecedented government-wide effort, as well as including so many stakeholders and advocates in the community. And I still remember, because we all cried that day, some of the very touching stories that were shared with us. We announced our efforts to improve legal assistance and public housing protections for domestic violence victims. In addition, we spoke about the importance of protecting children and breaking the cycle of violence. As chair of the White House Council on Women and Girls, I am proud to say that the Obama administration will continue to find new ways to protect American women as they so bravely try to combat domestic violence. And we're going to continue to be inspired by your bravery, your compassion, and your tireless efforts for this cause. We are absolutely convinced that under this administration, we can make a huge difference. And the reason why is that we're going to do it not alone, but we're going to do it with all of you. We are sure that if working together, an issue that belongs front and center because it touches so many families across our country, we can combat it together. And so I thank you again for everyone who is here, everyone who cares so much about this issue as we do, and for our champions. Thank you, thank you, thank you for what you do on behalf of women, children, and your community each and every day. And on behalf of the President, we want to give you the recognition that you so much deserve. So thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it back over to Lynn.
Good afternoon. As I look at it, all of you, I always feel like we should have like a purple fashion show or something like that because you all look so beautiful. I do have my, purple on my wrist here. But thank you so much, Valerie. It's a privilege to work with you every day in your role as chair of the White House Council on Women and Girls. And I want to thank all of you here for joining us for this Domestic Violence Awareness Month. It was 30 years ago this month that the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence convened the first day of unity to raise awareness about this problem. And ever since that day, every October, we have gathered to mourn those who have died, celebrate those who have survived, and talk about the challenges that lie ahead. There are none better to help all of us rise to meet those challenges than our 14 champions for change who are here today. So another round of applause for all of them. But when I look out at all of you who are here and the folks who are watching online and all the people I've met as I've traveled around the country this October, I have to tell you that to me, you all are champions. The work that you do is life-saving. October is also a wonderful time to reflect back on the very humble beginnings of this movement. The first shelters were women's living rooms. The first hotlines were home phone numbers. Women came together and they began talking and sharing their experiences with violence. And they realized that they could help each other. And what followed is one of the most remarkable movements for social justice that this country has ever seen. These women raised money, they built shelters, they trained law enforcement officers, they wrote legislation, and they transformed the community response to domestic violence and sexual assault. The Vice President has often said that the women who started this movement are his heroes, and I echo that. But yet today, in spite of all of our work, domestic violence still causes more than 2 million injuries to women every year and more than $8 billion to our economy in lost productivity and other costs. And we also know that our young people are the most at risk. It's our young women, ages 16 to 24, who have among the highest rates of dating violence and sexual assault. Last year, as we celebrated the 16th anniversary of the Violence Against Women Act, Vice President Biden said, we are going to have a whole new awakening on this issue for young women and for young men. And we have. This summer, Vice President Biden convened a cabinet-level meeting to task federal agencies with coming up with concrete actions that they could take to address dating violence and sexual assault. That same day, we announced our Apps Against Abuse Challenge to technology innovators to team up with advocates to develop new ways of using technology to intervene in and prevent violence. And I will tell you, we have some wonderful submissions. People have asked me, can an app really help end abuse? But I've seen the partnerships that have been created between technology innovators and advocates. These partnerships will change the world. And we will announce the winners of the Apps Against Abuse Challenge within the next month. Last month, we also announced the expansion of the National Dating Violence Helpline to be available by text, chat, or phone 24 hours a day. We want people to reach out for help in the medium that they feel the most comfortable with. So I'd like to ask our representatives of the National Helpline and their partnering organization, Break the Cycle, to stand and be recognized. Thank you. As we were preparing to meet our champs today, I was also personally very struck by the voices that we would not be hearing today, by the people that we've lost over the past decade. And so on this very special day, we want to begin by remembering. First, we remember the 3 women who still die in this country every day as a result of domestic violence. These women are not strangers. They're our mothers, our daughters, our sisters, our co-workers, our neighbors, and our friends. We also want to remember the key activists and leaders that we've lost through illness and accidents over the past 10 years. We begin by remembering Susan Schechter, who we remember for her innovative work in connecting domestic violence and poverty. We begin by remembering Lupe Serrano, who taught all of us so much in her work in organizing within the Latino community. And Lupe taught us that true change is organic from within communities. We remember Diane Reese, who spent her life organizing and working and building the empowerment of women in rural Appalachia. We remember John Cohen from the New York City Batterer Intervention Project, who never stopped reminding us of the root causes of violence against women. We remember Sandra Camacho for teaching us about the connections between women, children, and community. And finally, we remember Paul and Sheila Wellstone. Sheila Wellstone devoted her life to this issue. She traveled around the state of Minnesota and visited battered women's shelters. She sat around kitchen tables and listened to the words of survivors. She brought those experiences to Washington, D.C., and Paul Wellstone brought them to the U.S. Senate. Their deaths were not a footnote in history, but rather a major loss for all of us who care about social justice. So we want to take just a moment in silence and in remembrance. Thank you. We are saddened by these losses, but we also know that their passion and their commitment is carried on in our champions of change. And so we turn to them now. I'd like to tell you a little bit about this very distinguished group on the stage, but then they're going to tell you more about the work that they do every day. Suzanne Dubois, oh, they all deserve a huge round of applause, so I'm going to ask you to hand. So I'm going to ask you to hold it now until the end. I want to say again that these 14 people represent all of you up here on this stage. And I feel that way every day when I walk in the White House. I walk in here with all of your stories. I walk in here with the stories of all the many survivors I've met over the years. I walk into this White House every day with those stories. Suzanne Dubois is the executive director of the Jeannie Geiger Crisis Center in Newburyport, Massachusetts. She is here today because of her innovative work in preventing domestic violence homicides. Next to her is Dave Thomas. He's being honored today as a law enforcement trainer. He considers ending violence against women as his calling in life. And we're joined by Misty Thomas, who is a member of the Santee Sioux Nation of Nebraska and is here today as a representative of the New Beginnings House, a shelter that has been many years in formation and just had their open house last month. We're joined by Nicole Desario, who is honored today for her role as a youth advocate and president of the Mask Theater Company, which she will tell you more about today. And next to her is William Killebrew, who many of you know. William is a child survivor of violence, and he's one who has turned his tragedy into triumph by teaching others about abuse. We're joined by Sharon Staple, who is honored today as the executive director of the New York City Anti-Violence Project, one of the first in the country to address domestic violence and sexual assault in the LGBTQ communities. And we're joined by Joanna Arusco. Joanna is a teen educator and survivor of dating violence. She is honored today for using her personal story to help other young people escape abuse. And next to her is Vincent Mazzaro, someone who's known me for quite a long time, and I've known him for his work as a law enforcement trainer. He is honored today for his innovative work in using technology to hold offenders accountable, and also for his commitment to supporting children who've witnessed domestic violence. And we're joined by Amelia Cobb, Amelia is honored today for her work promoting the leadership of historically black colleges and universities in preventing dating violence and sexual assault. And we're joined by Ko Jawa Vong, who is honored for her work in bringing the Hmong community and other people of color in Wisconsin together to end violence against women. We're joined by Becca Stevens. Becca is an Episcopal priest, and she is honored today as a founder of Magdalene House, a residential community for women, which she's going to tell you more about. And we're joined by Lena Al-Husani, who is the executive director of the Arab American Family Support Center in New York City. She is honored today for her work in preventing domestic violence, her work on child protection, and human trafficking. And we're joined by Meg Schneibel, who many of you have admired over many, many years. Meg is one of the first in the country to begin talking about economic empowerment as a strategy to help women escape violence. She is being honored today for her innovative training, bringing economic security and hope to survivors of domestic violence. And we're joined by Sherilyn Hamish, who is here today as a representative of a People's Place in Delaware, an innovative shelter using a trauma-informed approach to services. So I want to ask you once again to give a big round of applause to all of our... And now they're going to tell you more about their work. I'm going to join them on the panel, and we're going to start with Suzanne.
Okay, so first of all, an honor to be here. My name is Suzanne. I'm the CEO of the Jeannie Geiger Crisis Center in Newburyport, Mass., and I've been there for 18 years. But I was interviewed a few days ago, and a reporter said, you know, I'm not surprised that you are a survivor. I've always found that if you scratch an advocate, you'll find a survivor. And my story is not very different. I mean, that certainly applies to me. And so my story actually started in the 80s. I was in my 20s, I was young, I was inexperienced, I was married to a man, and I did not recognize the signs of abuse until it became very physical. And during that time, we lived in California, and he was a commercial fisherman. So I welcomed those times when he would be gone for days or weeks at a time because I was in peace. And I was driving to work one day, and I heard a radio interview, and it was a woman who was opening a battered women's shelter. And I thought, that is so awesome. I probably didn't think awesome, but I thought, cool, probably. That is so cool. How wonderful that someone's going to do that, and how wonderful, because people must need resources like that. I don't know who they are, but they must need them. And so days later, my husband came home, and that was the first time I realized, wow, she is really talking about women like me. And I always felt quite lucky that I escaped that relationship with not a lot of fanfare. He went on one trip, I came back to New England, and that was kind of the end. So I felt I was done with that, and I went on to my life, and until Nicole Brown Simpson was murdered. And to me, that was a decade later, and it was a huge wake-up call for me, because I felt like even though I had been a victim, there was a lot about domestic violence I didn't know. And I really thought, well, here's a woman who had all these resources, and she couldn't keep herself safe. She couldn't stay safe. And what it did was it inspired me to volunteer at our local Women's Crisis Center, which is where I work now. And I had been the executive director for about 3 years when one of our clients was murdered. And at the time, if you run a nonprofit, I think there are times when you start thinking, am I good at this job? Is this the right job for me? Am I doing a good job? And when Dorothy was murdered, I thought, well, this isn't the time to start wondering, am I doing a good job? It is time to get to work. And what we really started to think about, and as an organization, I had a lot of depressed long-term advocates who came to me and said, I don't know what we're doing. She came to us, we knew she was in danger, we couldn't save her. What are we doing? And so we began to try to figure out what were the gaps in the system. How did this case slip through our fingers? How did she end up dead? And using the research of Dr. Jacqueline Campbell, we created the high-risk team model, which really prevents domestic violence homicide by doing 3 things. One is containing offenders and holding them accountable. It is ensuring that victims have access to comprehensive services, and it is changing the system so that we're no longer looking at victims who are in high danger as your only recourse is to go into shelter. And so what happens if women can't or won't go into shelter? Do we have another option? So that is the basis for the model that we created, and we're looking forward to continuing the replication of this model. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's so good to see so many people in the audience that I've had the great pleasure to work with over the years, because I think we all know collaboration is really the key. And I came into this field being someone who had everything, incredibly loving family, loving parents. And, but early on I knew to whom much is given, much is owed. And I really, the seeds of my passion began back in the second grade when I was down watching TV and a news flash came on the screen, Martin Luther King's been assassinated. And I went up to my father and I said, Dad, who's Martin Luther King? And my father, being the educator that he is, said, go to the library and you come home and you tell me who Martin Luther King is. That's where Dr. King started as my hero. All through growing up, I had pictures of King on my walls. And I had quotes of King. In fact, anybody who knows me hears me throwing out quotes all the time of Dr. King because it inspires my work. Then I went on to college, and I was still looking for how to channel my passion. And as a junior, first semester, junior year, I stumbled into a women's studies course. And even though I was a double major, majoring in business and in history, I started learning a side of history that wasn't taught across campus. And it was eye-opening. And wanting to graduate on time, I knew I couldn't have a third major, but I started working towards a minor in women's studies. And in my senior year, I was president of the student government, and one of the fraternities on campus, in their infinite wisdom, decided to show an X-rated film on campus. And I was struggling. What can I do? I got to do something. I remembered back to what Dr. Markowitz had said in my first course, Women in Perspective. And I knew I had to do something. And I studied that Constitution and came back the next Tuesday, and when I gave my communications, I read an executive order that I drafted the night before that forbade X-rated movies at Towson University. And that was in 1983. And today, X-rated movies cannot be shown at that school because you have to have a 2/3 majority vote of the student body to override an order like that. And thus, a violence against women activist was born. I graduated and I actually became an advocate before I became a cop. And I became a cop because it was the best way that I knew I could go on the front lines and be a true ally and find ways in order to combat violence against women. In 1986, it wasn't a popular theme, but I wanted to start a domestic violence unit. You know, who thunk it? I thunk it because I knew that Martin Luther King said the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward what? Justice. That's what we're all about. It's been an incredible journey. I'm a devout optimist, and we're going to keep getting things right. We're going to keep doing things right. I've been incredibly blessed to have my beautiful wife with me here, and when I think of her, I think of a song by Clint Black that in the song he talks about she's half the man I am, and that's my wife. Thank you.
Midakiapi, chante washte na pet shiuzapi, ampo mini boja de mie. Washichi Misty Thomas de Makiapi, Santi Himataha, Santi Nebraska Himataha, Demakota. It is a great honor to be here with you today. I shake your hand with a good heart. And my name is Misty Thomas. I am from the Santee Sioux Nation of Nebraska, and I'm also a descendant of the Tlingit of Alaska. And I'm the Director of Social Services for the Santee Sioux Nation, and within our department, we're a small tribe, so I have a lot of I have APS, CPS, ICWA, family preservation, independent living. We have an AmeriCorps program, and we have a horse grant. And when I started, and also the domestic violence and sexual assault program, when I went back home to work 5 years ago, I had two main goals that I wanted to see for my tribe, and one was a domestic violence shelter, and the other one was a horse program. I'm not going to talk too much about the horse program today, but those are the two babies that I have, besides my other two babies at home. But I guess my journey began about 10 and a half years ago. And when I was in school, and I had met my husband, and again, just like anybody else, the signs were there, but I didn't know. I was even as I was going through these classes and everything, and learning about it, I didn't realize that I wasn't going to be able to get myself out. Not until actually this last few months has been very difficult for me. In July, we obtained the facility for the Otokahe Techa Tipi, which means New Beginnings House. And that was also the same month that my husband left. And so it's very, very, very raw still. But I wanted to get through today without crying. But we got the shelter in July. It's a beautiful 7-bedroom home located on our reservation in northeast Nebraska. We have a very small reservation. Right now we have about 12 beds available. We have our first client already. We had our open house on September 20th. And we had a lot of very strong support that came to Santee to support us. And it's been an amazing journey so far, and I know it's only beginning. Already, there was a lot of bumps in the road just to get the facility, and we're still experiencing it. We're trying to get our security system in place, our policies and procedures, everything like that, but we do have our first client, and so it's an honor to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for speaking. And thank you everyone that's here today. I am truly honored to be here with all of you. You've been doing amazing work for probably longer than I've even been alive. So my name is Nicole DeSario. I am 16 years old and I go to Montgomery High School in Yes, yeah, I was expecting that. I go to Montgomery High School in New Jersey, and I am a student advocate and educator for teenage relationship abuse. I am the founder and president of a group in my school called Mask Theater, which stands for Montgomery Advocates for Solidarity and Kindness. I first started to become involved in relationship abuse education about a year ago, where I did my first seminar at a local middle school. Appropriately, the first time that New Jersey recognized February as Teen Dating Violence Awareness and Prevention Month. That was this past February. Additionally, at the same time, I contacted local representatives and championed a bipartisan bill, A 2920, that mandated that grades 7 through 12 have teen dating violence education incorporated into their health curriculums, safe dating education, starting September 2011 school year. So following the passage, that bill was signed into law by Christie on May 5th. And I was very excited. So following the signage of that bill, I wanted to create a sustainable program where I could continue educating students in my own community about teenage relationship abuse. So I created Mask, which is a theater group that educates students in an interactive manner using discussions and performing presentations that we adapt through the anonymous submissions that teenagers in our own community give to us on our blog page that we have online, or they can email us too. It is also a group where we are educated and certified in relationship abuse education because we have connections with a local agency called the Resource Center of Somerset. Tony Winchaz, the director of community affairs there, gave all the members of my club a training program that certified them in this education. So a big concept of Mask Theater is a goal that we have is to go to different schools in our community and try to implement our program into their schools so they can be a resource and support group for the students in their own school as well. And so that's one of our goals that we want to do. Additionally, we have this vision of working with the Resource Center of Somerset and creating a nonprofit organization that will be available to any student in our community for specifically geared toward teenagers, because I feel that it's a population that isn't given, is kind of neglected when it comes to relationship abuse education, and 1 in 3 teenagers will experience a abusive relationship at least once. And so our goal is to combat relationship abuse in teenagers by creating a unity in our own community.
My name is William Kellebrew, and I'm just honored to be here. And when I think of a room like this, I think of how grateful I am to be here, because in 1984, it was a different room. I woke up to the terrifying sounds of my mother screaming, and from that moment on, she was murdered, shot right in front of me. Also witnessed my 12-year-old brother get murdered, and had to beg for my life at gunpoint from a killer who had been released from prison from serving an 11.5-year sentence for second-degree murder, and we didn't know that. So it was after that, in fact, the day after that, my grandfather actually shot his neighbor in front of me. This is July 2nd, 1984, and on July 3rd, 1984, my grandfather shot the neighbor, and then the 4th of July came, and you can imagine what I had to go through hearing the gunshots all over again and all over again. And so by the age of 13, I was completely drained of my dignity, completely drained of my respect for myself and respect for others. And I wanted to take my life. And at 13, I wanted to jump off of a bridge. But I said, something happened. I gave William another chance that morning as I looked over the bridge. And I made it to school, and an assistant principal named Charles C. Christian called my grandmother, he made an emergency call to my grandmother, who made an emergency call to Children's Hospital, where I met my first therapist at 13. After 3 years of suffering, I started my road to recovery. And that was Christine Pierre, who was a social worker. So for social workers out there, your work counts. And just recently, after 25 years, I just got a chance today to publicly thank her. I'd never seen her since that point. And today I thanked her, and I also thanked my assistant principal publicly. It was the first time I had seen them since my childhood. To give them, just that round of applause. And since then, it's been a long road to recovery, but I took up the mantle over the past few years and have really steered the way for others who have suffered through the kind of violence that I've witnessed. And I realized that that we have to take a look at we have to put our mask on first. I always think about the airplane, you have to put your mask on before you can apply it to somebody else next. And the Surgeon General always talks about that, and the flight attendants. But we have to do that, and for a long time, I've been putting other people's masks on, but I decided to put mine on, and now I've got it tight and in place. And so at my university, there were two professors, Clarence Davis and Professor Barbara Harvey, who started a foundation called the William Kellebrew Foundation. I'm not even the founder. They started it, but what it did to me was it put my name on a marquee and said, you're responsible, you're accountable. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And today, we champion a collective and coordinated and proactive approach, the same kind of approach that Christine Pierre used, the same kind of approach that Charles C. Christian used and my grandmother used to get me and nurse me back to health. And today, the mission of the organization, we are a resource for individuals and institutions committed to breaking the cycles of violence and poverty. We realize poverty also plays a huge role because my mother was on welfare when she was murdered, and we fought hard to get to where we are today. But I wouldn't be here today if my grandmother didn't jump in at the age of 10, and she took us on, and she's never looked back. And she's in the audience today, by the way. Thank you, Miss Dolores Short.
I just need a moment. First of all, I want to thank Lynn and everyone at the White House for this extraordinary recognition. And I have to say that I'm just completely overwhelmed by the talent and brilliance and strength of the people that I'm sitting with. So I'm very honored. My name is Sharon Staple. I'm the executive director of the New York City Anti-Violence Project. And our mission is to work with lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and HIV-affected people who experience hate violence, sexual violence, or domestic violence through a combination of direct services, community organizing, and public advocacy. Our principles that we operate under are safety, support, and self-determination, and we work with survivors to create programs that we think are particularly effective in LGBTQ communities, including programs that we have in the Bronx and in Queens to work with transgender people of color who are experiencing violence that is unique to both their sexual orientation and their race and ethnicity. We also work with survivors of violence through our Speakers Bureau, where we teach survivors the speaking, leadership, and activist tools that they need to become anti-violence activists in their own rights. And we also work, we provide the first and, as far as we know, the only mixed gender and LGBTQ inclusive support group in working with survivors of intimate partner violence, which provides folks with a space to explore both the violence and how that impacts their identities specifically. Sometimes, though, I was thinking about the innovation and why we do the work. And sometimes I think the most radical work that we do is actually the simplest, which is to make LGBTQ people visible in this work and in the conversations that we have about domestic violence. LGBT people have very few safe places in this country. We face almost daily discrimination, bias, and lawful discrimination against ourselves and our communities because of who we are and who we love. And in the midst of that, we also experience intimate partner violence at the same rates that every other community experiences it, in 25 to 33% of our relationships. I made notes because Lynn told us 2 minutes and I wanted to pay attention to that. And while there are unique issues that affect LGBTQ survivors, at the root of all of this, we have the same issues that everyone else has, which is the power and control that abusive partners have over those who are being abused in a relationship. And despite our similarities in that way, one of the big differences that we experience with the rest of the world is that we don't find the same treatment or support or welcome environment when we try and seek help to address the violence that's in our relationships. And we at AVP know it can be complicated to talk about violence outside of the boxes that we've sort of identified as the paradigms that we talk about violence. So we talk about husbands and wives, and we talk about girlfriends and boyfriends, and we talk about men and women. But when we do that, we exclude every LGBTQ person who is listening to that conversation or who is in that room or who is a part of that discussion, because that's not the paradigm that we live with. And so part of what we want, part of what the New York City Anti-Violence Project does is creates a space for people to be exactly who we are. And part of what I have to say to you today is we know as allies you work with us to end violence, and we work with you to end violence. And that is our goal, to prevent any other person from ever experiencing intimate partner or sexual violence. What we need from you as our allies is to create the space for us to be exactly who we are and to love exactly who we love while we're dealing with this violence. So that's what I'd ask for you, of you today. And thank you again very much.
Wow. I am very touched and honored to be here. You guys are amazing people, and I'm sure I'm going to continue hearing more amazing stories along the way. But my name is Joanna Orozco. I am 22 years old, and I work for the Domestic Violence and Child Advocacy Center in Cleveland, Ohio. I am a survivor, as well as I am a teen educator. And what I do is I share my story with teenagers in the high schools. I share my story with them. My story goes back 4 years ago. I was in an abusive relationship with my ex-boyfriend for 2 years. I went through the emotional, verbal, and physical abuse. Leaving my relationship, finalizing it, my ex-boyfriend came back and raped me at knife point. 2 weeks after I reported it, my ex-boyfriend came to my house and shot me in the face with a sawed-off shotgun. So I share my story with the teenagers, and I tell them what a healthy relationship is, what an unhealthy relationship is, and how to get out of it. How is a safer way to get out of it? And I was blown away doing my work for 2 years now. Blown away of that I was never by myself. I thought I was always alone, and I was never alone, because there are thousands and thousands just in Cleveland and just in Ohio that are going through something like this. And I wanted to do more. I did not only wanted to share my story, that wasn't enough for me. So what I got to do was I got to help pass 2 laws in Ohio. House Bill 10 is that now teens are able to get protection orders, either if they are in an abusive relationship or being stalked or bullied. That's there for them to have now, something I couldn't get at my time of need. And then now also, as Nicole also mentioned, in Cleveland, almost going to be a year now, then now teens are going to get education in their high school from grade 7 to 12 on what teen dating violence is. So I got to do all that work. And I will continue doing all my work, and all of you have inspired me, and teenagers throughout my way have inspired me to continue doing what I do. So thank you again for being here. It has been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. It says so much to victims, the fact that you're here. Nicole, I'm a 30-year police veteran, and yes, I'm one of those ones that has done more domestic violence work than the years that you have been born. But I will say that for all the times, and I've been stabbed and shot at as a police officer, but for the sake of people like Nicole and William and Joe and the other victims that are out there, I will be glad to risk my life if I can help them. I started as a young child with immigrant parents, and my father was a tough old Sicilian, and we had a lot of rage that he came with, and oftentimes we would quietly sneak and put clothes in a bag and walk down to the bus stop and go stay at my uncle's house where it was safe. And I could always see I had a kind, gentle mother, and I could always see into her soul the hurt that she had, that she didn't deserve. And I made it my mission to be a police officer to help other people. And the first time I can remember going to a woman who called because of domestic violence, she couldn't talk to me, but I could see in her soul the same hurt that my mother had. And I made it my mission to do domestic violence at work as a police officer to reach as many victims as possible and to try and develop a coordinated response, because it was imperative that we hold the abuser accountable for unforgivable acts. But it was also more significant to protect the children, to provide safety for the victim, and to get that victim into services that she probably didn't know were out there. And if she had heard of them, we needed to connect her to those services. I was fortunate to become a police officer in Palm Beach County, Florida, in the sheriff's office, where the sheriff said to run and help victims. And where in 1997 we had 10 domestic violence homicides, we took an aggressive approach. We made public awareness to those victims that were hidden behind closed doors know that we wanted them to call, that we were there to hold the abuser accountable, but more importantly to make safety our number one priority for that victim. We were able to reduce domestic violence homicides. We got grants to provide the photographs of the victims and the crime scene for the judges at first appearance. And I'm pleased to say today, I'm very proud that that agency has carried on, as many other agencies in Florida, where I'm from, have done, where they have grown to protect the victims and put the victims in shelters when necessary, provide services, that connection for the victims. And much to my greater satisfaction, I've now left police work to go to work for Lynn's old agency, the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence, where there are miracle workers there. There's someone manning that hotline at 3 o'clock in the morning waiting for a victim to call. So I am here representing them. I'm also representing police officers and prosecutors and advocates who reach out to victims. But I'm only just a small piece of the puzzle, because the victims are the true heroes. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amelia Cobb, and I'm so excited to be here and share this experience with all of you all. I'm actually president of the Right Group. We're a health and human services consulting group that comes together and mobilizes communities to make a change. We have 2 national projects on violence against women. One of them is Ending Violence Against Women, the HBCU project, which is one of my just projects I love, and just energy. Not that I don't love all of them, but I love students. And I stand here today, I always get asked this question, which is, why do you do this work? And I'm going to get to that in a second, but the key reason why I focus on HBCUs is because I'm standing here today because of the silent student who cannot talk, or the mother or father who's working endless hours to send their child to school, and they don't have the money, but they're working, and they want their child to be there in a safe environment. So I started the project with a group of people who also went to HBCUs and came together with a little bit of seed funding from the Office of Women's Health. And moving forward today, we've been able to mobilize the project to reach 9 schools. And we have a signature project every year that we do, which is 3 days, 3 ways. And within 48 hours, we're able to mobilize up to 7,000 students to take a stand around sexual assault. We do this in partnership with Denim Day USA, so we have been official sponsors and partners with them for the last year. But we actually create these programs, you know, from the ground up. So more or less, it looks very different at every HBCU. This past year, we've been able to do case competitions with the School of Business to actually look at how schools of business in academic institutions can actually begin to address violence against women as a whole, from a social norms campaign and a marketing campaign. I think for me, I got in this work and I represent the bystander. Oftentimes you hear victims, who are advocates, which is great. We need all those stories. But what I've learned in the last 10 years is that we have so many bystanders who either don't know what to do or don't know how to let their voice be heard. And I stand here as a bystander who was a teen, who was a roommate, who was a college mate, and who in the last 5 years I found out it was a granddaughter. So I think that if you remember anything about what I do and my project, just remember that I am a bystander, and bystanders can actually make change.
Hi, Nyajong. My name is Gajua, and I'm actually from Madison. I was born in Laos. But before I start, I have to shout out to a few people because they voted me to come. So as a collective, we had to decide who was going to come. And so they voted for me to come. And with that, I have to say hi to all the Freedom Inc. staff, especially the youth staff, and also hi to my 1.5-year-old because he doesn't know it yet, but is making sacrifices so that he can have a different future and a different world to live in. And so I have to say hi to him and the many, many other single mothers who are out there doing this work, because we sacrifice a lot so that our children and our sisters and our mothers may have a different world to live in. And so I just want to say that. And also with that, a thank you to my mother for always being there and supporting me and taking care of my kid while I'm away. So they always think I'm on vacation. And so now that we're live streaming it, she can see. But with that said, I want to say that I too am a survivor of a history of women who are warriors before me. A survivor, a niece of an auntie who took her own life back in the home country, because people seem to think that domestic violence is an American thing or domestic violence is a new age thing. And I want to say that it looks very different in different communities. And so my auntie who took her own life, because there was no option at that time, and she was in a very abusive marriage and kept coming back to my father and them for help, and they kept sending her back to her husband, and so finally she took her own life. And then my mother's own story of saying, I had enough, and one day just fought back, and my father after that never touched her again because she was like, I just had enough. And then my own story of I've had enough. And so I'm here today to say that it is possible, and that advocates are survivors, are victims, and sometimes they are just bystanders. But the majority of the time, we are not only survivors of our own community's patriarchal system, but as women of color, we are survivors of the mainstream system that often is more oppressive in many different ways. And so that leads me to my work with Freedom Inc. in that, like, we're not here just to talk about interpersonal relationships and violence against us from people who are supposed to love us. We're here to also address the violence perpetuated against us from the system that's supposed to protect us. And so about 10 years ago in Madison, which is predominantly white, but there's a small few of us, a population of Southeast Asians who are refugees who came to this country as a result of the end of the Vietnam War. I was born in Laos as a refugee child, survived the famine during the war, survived the years in the refugee camps, and then am trying to survive the US, right? And so with that said, I stand before you and speak on behalf of the people that I love and care about who may not be able to speak for themselves because of language barriers, because they've lost their lives to domestic violence, or other war crimes, or other violence against women and children, to say that there has to be a different way of creating a different world. And that is that it's not enough to just create services, and that there has to be social shift, there has to be new social norms, and that men along with women have to be a part of that. And that it is not enough for me that we create services, but that there has to be an actual shift in your mind. there has to be a shift in our hearts, because this doesn't, I'm not here to stop domestic violence or to see how many people I served. I'm here to end that. Because if we don't look at it, so I say that to say that if you're trying to end something, you don't just create services. You need to look at the root causes. And the root causes are patriarchy. It looks different here, but in my community, I know what it looks like. And we need to like combat both of that. But I want to end with saying that there are many, many women in Wisconsin that I get to stand on their shoulders today. And that is, of course, the people I work with at Freedom Inc., because they do the day-to-day work. And also a collective of Hmong women who, on a daily basis, we have to hold our community accountable for how they treat us as women, as daughters, as girls. And until we do that within our own communities, how can we hold other people accountable? And then as a person of color in Wisconsin, I also have to stand with my sisters of color to hold the system accountable. Because without those two changes, it's a revolving door. And as a survivor, as a victim, as a, you know, my history depends on those changes. And so, and I want a different world for my son. But I also want to thank the national organizations who've always been behind me and always been supportive. So thank you for allowing us to be here and to share a little bit of our inspiration to you all. Thank you.
I carry into this hallowed space the gratitude of a community, and it is comprised of hundreds of women who have survived violence and rape and childhood trauma and prisons and trafficking and prostitution and streets, and bear witness to the truth that in the end, love is the most powerful force for social change in the world. We are also grateful that you recognize the work of Magdalene, the residential communities of women who have survived all of that. And Thistle Farms, its social enterprise. Magdalene began in 1997. We opened our first doors and offered sanctuary to 5 women. We took no federal or state money and relied on the gratitude for all those who had received some mercy in our lives for what we had survived. We have 6 homes and communities. We have our Thistle Farms community is comprised of 35 women who are residents and graduates of those residential programs, free housing for 2 years. Every department of the company is led by a woman of Magdalene. We have a whole bath and body care, all natural product line that goes to 200 retail stores. We have partnerships now with sister communities in Ghana, in Kenya, and Rwanda. And we teach the model in cities all over this nation. It is a great privilege to be here, and on behalf of all of us, we are so grateful, and it really gives me renewed courage to go back out and seek out those other hallowed spaces in this world where the truth of the consequences of the universal violence on women's bodies takes its toll on individual backs. And love still endures and heals.
My name is Lina Al-Husseini. I'm the Executive Director of the Arab American Family Support Center. And again, like everyone else, I'm really so honored to be here today, especially for a little girl from Jerusalem who moved to the States. I'm also an immigrant. You have no idea what a big deal this is. And I'm here with my heroes, because when I tell you my story, you'll know. So let's give you a little bit. My first job, and it's 25 years ago. So I'm another one of those who's been around a long time. The first job I ever had, I was working in a hospital in the Middle East. And one of my cases came in. It was a 13-year-old who was pregnant. So looking through her paperwork, her husband was a 42-year-old man. So I had been living abroad, not in my home country, for a long time, so I had no idea. So I went to my boss, and I'm like, this is child abuse. This is a 13-year-old who's pregnant. And he's like, this is the law. There's nothing you can do about it here. What else can you do? She's pregnant, and that's her husband by law. So that was my first experience with child abuse and all of that. The second experience would be getting women and children who were abused, beaten up with marks and what have you, and there was no legal remedies. I mean, all we could do was fix them up and take them back home. There's nothing we can do about it. So in time, my frustration grew, and I became more of an activist, and I was lucky enough to work in Jordan and to work with Queen Rania and open the first child protection organization in Jordan. Actually, it was at the time in the Middle East, and that was the late 90s. And we had no clue about this kind of work. We were just, responding to the issues that we saw in our community. So we were getting the kids, like everybody else. We had physical and sexual, everything, emotional. So the first problem we had was convincing our community. We had those same issues, always, the first response is like, we don't have this kind of thing, obviously, of course. We do like everyone else. But we quickly realized that with every child that came in, the mother was also a victim as well. And also, we didn't have we still don't actually have an infrastructure in the Middle East. There's nothing you can do about it. She can come in and she'd be broken, have broken arms, what have you, and there's nothing for her to do. So I had always known about how, I wanted to learn more, and I wanted to learn in a country where there was an infrastructure. And I had always grown up knowing the United States had the best kind of system in place, and owing to many of you, I'm sure. So I came here to learn from you what we can do as a community to help my own people, and Arabs and Muslims, to really sort of develop programs to address our own issues. Because our issues are a little bit, in our community, and sounds like very many, immigrants, we have many similarities. Our community isn't really open to a woman speaking out against domestic violence or child abuse. What happens if you do speak out? Your own family isolates you. Your own community isolates you. There's no shelters. There's no, there's nowhere for you to really go. So it's not just being afraid of the offender or the person who's abusing you. It's also being afraid of your own family, because there's nowhere for you to go. Oftentimes when there's issues of sexual abuse or what have you, the woman has to be fearful because of honor killings from her own family as much as the other person. And this is very true here in the United States. So we've been doing, since I've been here in the United States, I've been very lucky. I've been working at the Arab American Family Support Center, and we decided from the get-go we're going to really tackle those issues and tackle them with integrity and really push the boundaries, but really address the issues we know were in our community. So we were very lucky. We got a grant for culturally sensitive programs, which was like, wow, a gift from heaven, because it allowed us to do something no one has done before. We were able to work on domestic violence and sexual assault, knowing our community, knowing the issues of for instance, honor killings, knowing that if a woman speaks out, the next day, if she's like 14 or 15, they can take her back home and you never hear back from her, international child abduction, all of these issues. But we've also been very lucky to be able to work on issues of teen dating. Of course, to this day, you ask many Arabs and Muslims, and our kids don't date, obviously. They all date like everybody else. But then our kids are at a disadvantage because they can't go back home and talk to their parents. And they don't know how to keep themselves safe. And if somebody's abusive to them, they kind of take it, because the worst thing that can happen in the world is that mom and dad will find out. Because that could turn really ugly with the honor and all of that. And they can be taken back home at 11 or 12, and you don't know what's going to happen. So that was one of the things we've been very, very, very proud to do. I don't know of any other organization that does this. And we've helped, we've had over 400 clients in like a year and a half, and we're so proud of the work we've been doing with teen dating and with domestic violence. But one of the things I'm very proud about is by doing this, we've allowed others back home and in the United States to open up about this issue. So we've been actually getting calls from Arab and Muslim countries to learn from what we've been doing here that's been successful with the Arab and Muslim community here in the United States. So I feel, every single one of you, you're actually changing the world for the better, because your work allows others to open up and talk about the issues, but allows them to learn and build on what you've done. And violence begins at home. If we can stop violence in the home, imagine what we can do for society. So thank you all very much. And,
Wow, that's hard to follow. My name is Meg Schnabel, and I want to share just a couple of things about myself today. First of all, I am the executive director of just an amazing organization, Redevelopment Opportunities for Women in St. Louis, Missouri, that has been doing a lot of work at improving the lives for low-income women by increasing financial capability. We know that there's just such a strong connection between poverty and abuse. And it's that connection that's driven the work that we're doing in our organization. I think about 15 years ago, when I was working in a shelter program, so much of the funding that started to come into our work was about units of service. Let's start increased counseling services. I mean, so many foundations and local funders wanted us to do work around increasing counseling services, because if we can only counsel those women not to get in those relationships, everything will be better again. Well, we certainly have learned a lot. And one of the things I knew at that time was I didn't want to do that anymore. Women were telling us over and over again that they needed assistance around economic work. For the past 15 years, we've seen amazing things done. The Allstate Foundation, the National Network to End Domestic Violence, and many local organizations have been increasing services, delving into looking at how we can improve our economic advocacy work, create new and innovative interventions and partnerships with folks around the country, and that's what we've been doing and I've been focusing on. The second thing I just want to say is, I mean, it is amazing to think 25 years. I mean, that's how long I've been in the battered women's movement. But I am remaining so committed and passionate. And it's because of this interconnection we have with one another. When I sit in this room and listen to these stories, truly, it's so inspiring. I wish I could take everyone in my organization, well, we kind of are, right? We're streaming this thing, and hear these stories, because this is what is so inspiring about keeping us going every day, because it is very tough. It is very challenging. There's so many barriers in so many ways. The other thing I wanted to say is I have had such amazing mentors. And I know we put some folks up on the picture screen early. I just look at those men and women, amazing people, and people who are still living today, amazing people. Feel like you're a mentor. I mean, I know that, when we get, old, which I feel like I am, I'm always still really inspired by the people around me, but believe that you're a mentor to someone else. We need to bring more people into this movement and see the difference that we all can make together. Thank you so much. It's so exciting to be here, and I'm so proud to be among all of you.
Hi, I'm Sherilyn Homlish from Delaware, and we're really happy to be here. And we didn't realize we're actually pretty close, and we could come anytime you need us. So, and I'm not here for the work that I've done. I'm here for the hard work that staff have done to change a shelter program from a traditional program to a very different kind of place. And I've just really appreciated the people that have come along that have helped to influence that and to have helped to make that happen. For years, I worked in shelter programs where women complained about what it was like to be in a shelter, where they really struggled with all the rules that shelters had, where they felt like people didn't really understand what they were going through and the struggles they had with their kids. And we all knew there was a different way. We just didn't know what that was. And a woman came years ago to Delaware called Lydia Walker, not Lenore Walker, but Lydia Walker. And she really challenged us to look at the shelter and how we were doing our work, and really challenged us to move away from the idea that the women were suffering from mental health disabilities, from addictions, and look at what they were really suffering from, which was trauma. And we didn't have the language back then. We just talked about what was going on with them. And she came back and did a workshop called Whose House Is It Anyway? And really made us think about why we were doing things the way that we were doing. And yes, we were receiving the money and we were the stewards of the shelters, but they weren't our shelters. They belonged to the women. And we wanted to find a way to give that back to them. And so luckily we ran into a woman, Sandy Bloom, who works out of Philadelphia in Community Works, and she had a model that we could adapt. And it had already been in place in psychiatric facilities and residential facilities, and was just starting to be looked at in domestic violence shelters and in homeless shelters. And so we quickly started to work with her, and we're lucky enough to have her come frequently and be able to work with us, and it changed everything. And we went from sitting down with women and going over pages and pages of rules and making horrible decisions about who got to stay in shelter and who didn't, to looking at why they were there and who needed shelter and why they needed shelter and what our job was to keep them in shelter and to keep them safe. And that became the question: how do we help you to be safe? And it just has made a huge difference. We're very excited about it. It's still incredibly hard work, probably harder than it was before, where you just made a rule, somebody broke the rule, you told them to leave, and you were done. But it's made a huge difference, I think, in the lives of the women that we work with, certainly in our lives, in terms of how proud we are of what we do and how much difference we feel like we made. And I just want to acknowledge one of the staff that's here with me. Marcy Rezak is our director of 2 of our shelters, and has worked with me to make sure that we keep the model in place. It's daily a struggle, very much. And I just want to acknowledge her. Marcy? Thank you.
Thank you all so much. There's so much here. I wish we had a day with each of you. And you've done an incredible job of linking the wisdom of the past with the vision for the future. So I think of Dave and Vince and Meg, who've been doing this for so long, and then the new leadership of Nicole and Joanna and William. So I feel like the future of this movement is in very good hands. I want to start with an issue that all of you touched on, and that is the risk of domestic violence homicide. And Suzanne, you know that you really have influenced a lot of us here in our thinking, because you were one of the first to say these homicides are predictable, therefore they're preventable. So I want to ask you, and then have others jump in from your own perspective. What's been the most effective part of your high-risk teams, and what is it that other communities can learn from what you've done?
The most effective part has really been, and I'm sorry, I forget, somebody here said, I think it was Susan, Sharon, thank you, talked about the connection between innovation and simplicity. And the wonderful thing about the high-risk team model is, while we certainly view it as innovative because we're getting incredible outcomes, it's a very simple system. And it is about coordination of efforts. It's about speaking the same language. That I will describe quickly the paradigm that was in place before the high-risk team, and I think most of you will recognize this. We were all doing our jobs, and we were doing them very well. The Crisis Center had great trained professional advocates. The law enforcement departments that we were working with were attentive and doing their jobs. The court was doing its job. But we weren't coordinating the efforts. We weren't speaking the same language, and I think that the piece about the high risk is when we introduced Jacqueline Campbell's research, we used that as our common language, and that transformed our ability to communicate. It increased our credibility with our partners, and we for the first time, I think, became true partners. And before that, I would say that we were limping along. And what happened was, without that coordination, huge gaps were opened up that allowed offenders to continue to offend.
So Dave and Vince, from the law enforcement perspective, can you tell us a little bit about how law enforcement can help prevent domestic violence homicides?
Most definitely. We've had a great experience in Maryland with the lethality assessment program. And what we found, we had 24 of us come together from different stakeholders. We stopped working in silos and started communicating. We communicated together to build the instrument. And then with the implementation, we made certain that once we found information, we were directly going to local service providers and collaborating with them to provide information to individuals, because it's more than prediction, it's about safety and prevention. And it's about being able to communicate to that individual sitting on the other side of the table or the other side of the room. Not only am I scared for you, but this is why I am scared for you. And getting that person connected to services. The fatality reviews and different things had told us many of these individuals didn't even know services existed. And as you've heard from some individuals sitting here today, didn't even realize others were out there that they could reach out to. So it's about getting them to services and realizing that the coordinated community response is absolutely the way to go. The more the seamless response, the more seamless that it is, the more we can keep women and their children safe and hold perpetrators accountable.
Well, and let's talk about your data, both of you. So Maryland in the past 3 years has reduced its domestic violence homicide rate by 41%.
Double digits.
Double digits, and you've had no domestic.
We've had no, so our team, it's in our 7th year of operation. Before we had 10 domestic violence deaths. We've had 0 homicides, and the wonderful thing is that 92% of the victims have been able to stay safely in their own homes without having to flee, which has been phenomenal.
I want to turn to Vince, and then I'll have William jump in here. But Vince, in the project you were doing where you were uploading photos to first appearances, do you think that played a role in reducing domestic violence homicide?
Absolutely. One of the key elements included in that was, okay, we had the offender in the back seat of the car, in the police car, but now we needed to attend to the victim, putting that victim in touch with services. If the lethality was there, to get an advocate to the scene, to take over from there, to act as her guide, to get her into shelter, to get her protected, to get her into services. Those photographs just emphasize, not only to the officer, to the victim herself. Sometimes that victim doesn't realize the severity because they've been living with that violence for years and years. To bring attention to it and now bring it to the attention of the courts, the prosecutors, to hold that offender accountable. But to raise that level in a coordinated community effort. That was the key. Getting people to work together to recognize how significant, if it was a simple battery, it was still significant because there were numerous times that victim was traumatized over and over again. So that was the key.
William, as someone who survived this level of violence, what would you add to this discussion?
Well, you know, at the point a victim wants to leave a relationship, that's the most lethal time. And it was for my mother. She was on the run for a week. And what played a major role in her, in Marshall capturing her, was that my sister and brother, who were younger, we didn't have a safety plan. My mother wasn't aware of what that was, and we couldn't frame domestic violence. And they told the killer where she was, and so he found her 2 blocks away and brought her back home and killed her. So safety planning is important. And as we travel across the country, the Caliber Foundation travels across the country, talks to youth and young people about being safe, about recognizing signs, about my story and what kind of things change. And I always get students come up to me and tell me what's going on in their lives. But I think that preventing it, starts with educating our children and victims and survivors about lethality and what's happening around that. So I think it's important to do that. Awareness is really the key. My mother had plenty of opportunities at the welfare office to be engaged on the issue. She always took my report card there and talked about school, but what did that office do to talk about domestic violence? And in '84, it was a different world, we know. But today, I see in D.C., we had this collective effort in the D.C. Coalition Against Domestic Violence and organizations like Safe Shores, where when I was a child, I went straight to the police department. But now children are taken, and all of the services are surrounding the child, and that's what's important. Take a child where they're safe, and they don't have to tell 5 stories to 1 story to 5 different people. Let's think about that. And children are often the ones missed when officers or authorities reach the scene. They go straight for the victim, and they miss the kids who are there. We have to engage our children more.
I want to turn to both Sharon, Kajawa, Lena, all of you. How do we make sure that our work on preventing domestic violence homicide is rooted in culture and community, that it's culturally sensitive work?
Yeah, in the state of Wisconsin right now, we're from Home Advocates, what we're doing is we're going to different parts of Wisconsin where there's a high incident of murder, homicide, suicide due to domestic violence. We're actually engaging the community about conversations of root causes and asking what the community think the root causes are, what have they done in the past that we can take as lessons learned, and what were some of the signs that they saw if they have heard or have seen or have experienced domestic violence, homicide, suicide. And so taking that data, I think then we can start to work within our own communities. Again, I think there's two-pronged here. One is to hold your own community accountable, because oftentimes what we see is when outsiders come and hold your community accountable, it's not effective. So taking a Hmong man who may have beaten his wife and locking him up is only going to cause more stress. Now, can we come up with a community accountability plan where we can hold him accountable so that he knows? And in the Asian community, it's all about saving face, right? So if that is about saving face, one of our youth said, why not make my dad pick up garbage in the Hmong community? Well, that sounds like a really good plan because he'll be embarrassed and he might not do it again, right? But these are I think that, so we have to hold folks in our own community accountable in the way that they can see that we're holding them accountable. And then we have to hold the systems accountable for how they treat our folks.
I mean, very, very similar. In our case, I mean, we've been working a lot on community outreach and education. So we have, when we first started this work, we would go to imams and our priests and imams, and we would ask them, you know, would you be interested in working with us or talking about domestic violence? They didn't want to have anything to do with it. Now, 5 years later, they're all asking us for more information because they've learned, you know, and they've seen and they've evolved. Their thinking has changed because of the work out there on domestic violence. So holding the community, it has to be organic. It has to come from the community that changed for them to accept it. It can't be imposed from others. It has to be, we have to own the change as well. But we've also been working a lot with, and in our case, for instance, again, it's a little bit different because when it's, there's a fear from your own family and there's equally from the aggressor's family. So it's two-way. So what's been happening is leadership in our community, imams and priests, and have been stepping up and have been helping these women. We've had women go to shelter. We've had many cases of women leaving the aggressor, their batterer, and they've done very well. And you know what? That kind of opened it up for others. They see hope. So we have good success stories, and that kind of allows others to hope to, you know, to believe that they can leave and that they can be safe. On the other hand, we also work with so many different city organizations. We work with the NYPD, we work with hospitals, we work with schools. I mean, we offer classes for credit at high schools. And most of the kids that come to us are Arab and Muslim because they don't get this information anywhere else. But they can get it in a school without their families finding out. And then they can be safe as well. So allowing them to get information in their language, seeing that this information is coming from people who understand their culture, that really makes a difference. But engaging both our community and the outer community as well, and allowing everybody to see that we can all help make each other safe together, but we just have to understand each other, and we have to just work together. So that's what's been successful for us.
And I'm a huge fan of the community accountability models, but I want to take a step back for the LGBTQ communities, because I think the first thing that needs to happen is that this country has to recognize our relationships. And until our relationships are recognized, then we're not in any of the statistics about how you prevent homicide, and we're not in any of the data about how domestic violence occurs. And I want to take a minute to acknowledge Victoria Cruz, who's here with me today. She's one of our senior domestic violence counselor advocates. And Vicki started at AVP first as a client and then as a volunteer and now as a staff person. And one of the things that Vicki does is go through newspapers to see if there are reports of people who were roommates or who were living together but are of the same gender, to see if there might be something around intimate partner violence. That's how we get our information about homicides. So when you start with the premise that we don't even get federal government recognition for our relationships, you can't really talk about homicide prevention until you start talking about recognition of relationships. And then I think all of these models sound fantastic, but we need to be included in them.
I want to make sure we have time to talk about youth, and we have Nicole and Joanna and Amelia, and tell us what's working when you reach out to your peers. You've done such amazing work at such a young age. What do you do to inspire other people to get involved?
Well, I definitely have to credit the devotion that, honestly, I wasn't expecting when I first started. I mean, I was a 16-year-old kid, and I'm trying to enlist like my friends to join this club that's about a really important issue, teenage relationship abuse, that most people don't recognize and frankly probably don't care about. But when I started talking to more people about it and everything, and getting them to come to the club meetings and getting them to come to the training programs over the summer, and so many people showed up, I was just like, what? You're here, you're supporting it, and it's creating this unity that I honestly had never expected. So I have to credit a lot of like the progress of the club to just the other people, the administration who have shown their support, that like the administration of my school that's helped make my club legitimate. Everyone, it's been like a big group project. You know what I mean?
And how did you get the administration to respond?
I had to contact them over the summer and it is a school system. You have to work within the school system and everything, and so it is a process. But from the start, they were interested in the subject. So I contacted my vice principal, Mr. Paba, and honestly, just working with him to go through all the steps of getting the club legitimized. It was, it just was going through the whole school process.
And Joanna, you're working in the community, you're doing school-based work, you're working youth groups, and you also, I should tell you all that Joanna appeared with the vice president on The View last month. And one of the things that we just talked about on The View was early warning signs and what it is parents and friends and community members need to know about the early warning signs of abuse and how they can help teens. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, luckily, since we got that bill passed, House Bill 19, we got 11 county collaborative, and that project is called the TINA Project, which got teachers, community, law enforcement, advocates, everyone just want to get involved, and they're very interested in some of the warning signs that we do, that we speak about is mainly the change of the character of the teenager. Basically, I'm gonna use for my example. I was in high school. I was a very lively person, outgoing. I would get in trouble in class for talking too much. Got good grades, always got involved. And then in time during my relationship, I changed. I became very isolated, stood quiet, didn't get involved. And I think that is one big thing, is to change of the person and to recognize and to actually not ignore them, but actually, sit down with them and say, what's going on? What can we do to help you? And I think that would be very, very important. And also with law enforcement, and I have to, give, kudos to you and all of you that actually get involved right there and then. Right when you hear, you give them resources right there from the beginning, and that's something that I didn't get. And I think that is something that all law enforcement should do, is to right there give the victim the resources, because that's very, very important. And also, I had to hit with, when it comes to like pediatricians, they need to get involved, because right from the beginning, they say they're not afraid of asking you the most personal question they can ask anyone: are you sexually active? So they ask that question, they give you all this information about birth control. Why not ask about, are you dating? How is your relationship going? And also, while you're handing them out birth controls, all this information about birth controls, or telling them, how to put on a condom, also give them information about what a healthy relationship is. how can you get out of it? Or do you know a friend? How can you help them? And so I think that will be very important to get everyone involved, because this is something you can't do on your own. You have to get everyone together and do it.
Amelia, I want to bring you in on this because you work on college campuses, and we're very aware of the high rates of both sexual assault and dating violence that happen among
And stalking.
young people, and stalking in college. So tell us what's been most effective for you in your work on campus.
Well, I'll be honest, our project doesn't do anything new that's never been done. We just do three things different. One, we actually let our students define their relationships and themselves, how they define it, from a sexual perspective, but also a personal perspective. Two, we also have the engagement of men in the conversation. And then lastly, we pull in the health component by asking them, how do you define health and how do you define your relationships? And so I think, if anything, what's working is having the conversation. There's a misconception that youth are college students, and by the way, who don't want to be called youth or teens, but that they don't have a lot to say on this issue. They have more to say than you can ever imagine. It's just, how do you ask the question and what platform do you give them? So we give them a platform to tell us, infuse hip hop, infuse fashion, infuse health, infuse their careers. And so that's really what's working, is we actually really just, with every school, find out what is the culture of that campus, because every HBCU is not the same. So I think you just have to go into that community, that campus, and let it self-define itself. And then from there, you can get a lot of the answers, and a lot of things will work.
Misty, we've heard about so much innovation tonight, but we're also very aware that shelter services and protection of women in shelter is still critically important. And it sounds like there were a lot of challenges for you all in getting your shelter up and running. What was the hardest part of that, and what do you suggest to other communities that are still trying to do that?
I guess for us, funding, and with federal funding, you can't, there's no construction. And so we had to find innovative ways of working around that and working with the funding agencies that we have, and to be able to actually get the facility with the funding that we have within the guidelines that are set forth, for us.
Great. Thank you all very much. I think that's all the time we have for this dialogue, but I wanted to note, Sherilyn, how important we believe your trauma-informed care is, and Meg, what you're doing to build economic security, and Becca, your social enterprise model is incredibly, it's fascinating, it's important, and I urge everyone to Google it and look up and hear about all the great work Becca is doing. So your words have been incredibly powerful today, your stories of survival. You've linked the past with the future. You've given hope to survivors, but most importantly, you've helped us envision a future where violence no longer exists in our homes. So thank you all so very much. And now I'd like to turn it over to Judge Carbon, who's going to close our program today and leave us with her remarks. Judge Carbon is the director of the Office on Violence Against Women within the Department of Justice. So come on up.
Thank you so much, Lynn. And I want to thank as well Valerie Jarrett. And standing in this room, I also want to acknowledge the Vice President and the President, who have been extraordinary leaders on this work. And we wouldn't be here but for them, and in particular the leadership of the Vice President, who, as we all know, because we all love the man, was the author of the original Violence Against Women Act that has inspired and let all of this come to being. And we are extremely grateful, and I want to honor and recognize him and the administration and all of the good work that's being done. But let me just say, it's not a very profound statement, but wow. I mean, just wow. Sitting here in the audience having the privilege of listening to all of you is truly moving and truly inspiring. And it is such a unique privilege to listen to what is happening around the country, in every community, in every population. And I know there are many more we could have up here, but in the time we have, this is an extraordinary blend of people here. And I want to thank all of you for doing what you're doing, because it's champions like you who are moving the world. And we really are privileged and grateful to what you're doing. So I want to thank all of you. It's this month that we as a collective nation focus our attention on domestic violence, because this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. But it truly is the work that is happening in communities across the country and by people such as yourselves who are really the ones who are making the difference in what we do. And I know that I speak on behalf of all of my colleagues at the Office on Violence Against Women, if they could just stand and be recognized, because they're helping with this work as well here. We are your partners, and we partner with Lynn, and I see people from OVC also as well, and others in the Department of Justice here, and many of our other partners out here as well, who are making this work happen and changing the lives of so many people in such a profound way. But you're spending your life's calling doing it every minute of every day, and we are immensely grateful for that. The leaders, you're the champions. Your title here is the champions. You're the ones who provide the impetus and the energy and the passion and the intelligence behind this work, and you're the ones who drive the movement and are what will change in future generations coming above us. And as I sit back here and I'm listening to 16-year-olds here, and I'm feeling like I'm more than 3 times your age, it's incredible to think of what you've done already at such a young age. And you should be immensely proud. So just, Nicole, that's just amazing here. But you all give further meaning, and you give real significance to the work around ending violence against women. And it's hard to stand here and not be inspired by somebody like Dave Thomas, a man who considers fighting violence against women his calling in life. And I have known Dave for a very long time. Dave was he's somebody I would call a protection order guru. He was part of the effort that the president recognized a year ago at the White House on a protection order guide that has changed the way we deal with civil protection orders around the country, and now has been translated in many different languages, including Chinese and Arabic, around the world to use as a way of helping to prevent domestic homicide. Getting a protection order truly does make a difference, and I thank Dave for that work. As Lynn indicated, at OVW, we also had this morning our own Domestic Violence Awareness Month program, and many of you were there, and I was so pleased to see this. And at this morning, we focused our attention on domestic homicide. And we were joined at that point by Deputy Attorney General James Cole. And I want to quote what he said, because it is so telling and so instrumental to us here today. He said, and I quote, "Attorney General Eric Holder and I believe that it's essential for the Department of Justice to lead the effort toward understanding how we can better serve victims of domestic violence and how we can prevent these terrible crimes from occurring in the first place." That's leadership. That's saying we need to be out in front preventing, not just reacting, but preventing. And we've heard that from so many of our speakers here this morning. But I also have to say, and I deeply resonate with the sentiments of Kajua, and by the way, I'm from Madison, so it's great to hear somebody from Madison speaking about this, and good to see that somebody like you is making things happen and change in Madison. But to hear what you say, that we really need to be at the forefront of making the change happen. You are out there leading that change and saying, this is what we need to do to make that happen. So I appreciate your leadership in this. And then this morning, it was the words of William Kellebrew, who also joined at our event, that really inspired me most. Now, for those of you who were there, if you've ever been inside the Great Hall at the Department of Justice, you know what a massive room this is. It's a 2-story room. There are alcoves on the top. When William spoke, you could have heard a pin drop. He didn't need a microphone. Everybody was so focused on his words, and they were so powerful and so moving. And those words will stay with us forever. So thank you again for speaking, and for your family and your grandmother being here. Thank you. I'm really very, very honored that you are here. The fact that he underwent the unspeakable tragedy that he did and stands before us today as an international advocate for peace is a testament to his resilience and his spirit. And he's nothing less than a champion to me. So thank you. Champions need vehicles to make this change happen. And there are programs across the country, many of them are represented here today and in our audience here today, that act as the vehicles for that change. And at our office, at the Office on Violence Against Women, our programs aim to build that coordinated community response. Again, what all the speakers talked about here today. And it's that coordination across systems, and as Sharon is saying, creating new systems that will make change happen and that will encourage victims to have the courage to come forward, because it's very difficult going to a perfect stranger saying, I need help, this happened to me. To file a complaint, to improve prosecution of sexual assault cases and domestic violence cases, to work on issuance and enforcement of protection orders. These kinds of programs improve our civil justice systems and they improve our criminal justice systems. And all of this together is tied to homicide prevention, indeed. And as well as I look across the range of champions here, we have such a blend. And I want to comment just on the fact that we have men standing here and so many men in the audience. And that is one of, at our office, our newest programs and one of the most exciting programs we have, because it speaks to a broad recognition that everybody is in this effort together. And we will never, ever end violence against women if we don't have men with us. And I see Neil sitting in the audience as well. We need everybody at the table, representing every conceivable constituency, just as we have everybody here, to make that change happen. And I know that all of that is true because I know it from the research that documents this, and I know from our field work when we go and we visit the programs like this, that we are making change happen. So let me thank, in particular, I want to highlight a couple who work with us, in particular Sharon Staple, the executive director at the New York City Anti-Violence Project, for your courage to speak. Lina Halsani, executive director from the Arab American Family Support Center, talking about what happens abroad, and because those lessons are so important here, because all of it is happening intermixed. Suzanne DeBuse, the chief executive of the Jean Geiger Crisis Center, is so critical as well. Thank you. And Vincent Mazzara of the Florida Coalition, thank you for leading as a law enforcement officer and showing us what we need. Becca Stevens, the founder of Magdalene and Thistle Farms, the importance of reaching out through faith community as well. Important partners in this effort. And Meg Schnabel, the executive director of the Redevelopment Opportunities for Women in Missouri. We are across the country with such a mixture of people. Your organizations have been recipients of our federal grant programs at OVW, and I know, again, speaking for our office, I couldn't be more proud of the work that you're doing and that you continue to do, because you're changing lives every day. Another area that the Deputy Attorney General focused on this morning, and that's extremely important to me, is the issue of domestic violence in Indian country. And I'm grateful that Misty Thomas has come and in the short time has been able to share a little bit of information, and I'm interested and anxious to learn more about the brand new New Beginnings House. Our department is working on proposals that are now a part of and hope to be in the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act as we approach our third reauthorization, clarifying that tribal courts will have full civil jurisdiction to issue and enforce protection orders. That's critical. We want to bridge those gaps so that we can truly address violence in Indian country, because it is so long overdue. So I don't think that I need to tell any of you this, but I would be remiss if I didn't close by saying, keep it up. Keep up the good work, keep up the good fight, because we desperately need all of your work to continue keeping communities safer in what we do. I want to especially encourage professors and educators we have up here, the likes of Dave and Amelia and Sherilyn, among others of you here, to support your students and encourage them to do research and encourage them to engage with practitioners in the field. We just had another roundtable bringing researchers and practitioners together. That is so critical that we share the information that we're learning. And again, to remark on the leadership of Nicole and Joanna, to think that in your young age, you have accomplished what one of my lifelong dreams has been, and that's to have a K-12 violence prevention curriculum. And you've done it, so hallelujah. You are going to be our future legislators, our future leaders, whatever you are going to be rock stars. You already are, so congratulations to you. So our sincere thanks to all of you. We close this afternoon with a renewed sense of purpose, a renewed commitment to what we do. Through your examples as victims, as survivors, as practitioners, as researchers, as friends, family members, colleagues, supporters, we are in this effort together. We are going to address this. We're going to end violence against women and men and children. We're going to do it because we're going to do it together, and we're not going to stop until we've accomplished our goal. And I hope you will leave this afternoon understanding that with these champions up here, there's not a person in this room who is also not a champion. I personally thank all of you for what you're doing. You're making a huge difference. Thank you, Lynn, for the opportunity to be here. It's a unique privilege. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thanks to our champions.